They're just terrified. They had no clue. They didn't know the area. They had no idea what they were in for. They thought it was all games, and it is not.
The transition into combat is a difficult one by any standard. No matter how sufficiently trained you are, there is no substitute for reality to give you a sense of how you're going to respond under fire, and how well you can coordinate with the rest of your team. For Daniel Ames, that kind of responsibility put him right where he wanted to be, even when it led to dangerous places.
I'm like, where are the civilians? I'm like, we gotta go. And I go to look over at my platoon sergeant, and he's standing there with the platoon leader, and I hear this loud, like a snap, and I just see blood spray out of his face.
What is true bravery? What makes a hero a hero? Tested by the worries of what's happening at home, thousands of miles away, and the reality of what you're facing here and now. When your life is in danger every second, and it's either kill or be killed. An original podcast from Incongruity Media. This is Anthony Russo, and this is War.
In a way, Daniel Ames always was bound for the military, though he didn't go directly after high school for a variety of reasons. One was that he'd been busted for pot and was pretty sure that would keep him out. And the other was that he had a pretty good job and a living girlfriend, Danielle, whom he was pretty sure he was going to marry. Still, he felt adrift and believed that he could find a purpose in the military. Plus, his father had been a Vietnam veteran, and Ames felt as if he had something to live up to.
My father, he passed away in 1992. It was pretty traumatic. It was December 23rd, 92. We were heading to my grandmother's house down in South Carolina, and we didn't know, but he had gotten laid off basically the night of the 22nd. This was early morning on the 23rd. He just surprised us and said, hey, we're going to head down to your grandma's for Christmas a little early. And we didn't think anything of it. We just know he kept rubbing his chest, and he just seemed a little out of it, but, you know, he had a really positive attitude, and he ended up having a massive heart attack on the highway about 20 miles from my grandma's house. That was my first taste of death at 9. But I know that he was airborne. He was a jump master, had gotten 3 Purple Hearts in Vietnam. He was also a rappel master, and he'd just done all this great stuff, and I didn't know a lot about it, and I never got to discuss it. And I figured, well, I'm not doing anything. I'm tired of seeing all this on the news. I would kind of like to do it myself, and I figured it would make him proud. I had a fairly decent job, but it was just really boring, and I had buddies who had enlisted and went to Afghanistan and the first few months of Iraq, and that's what I wanted to do.
Ames headed to the nearest recruiter, where he promptly was turned away for the drug bust, but an Army recruiter grabbed him and said he could make things right. Ames didn't care much about what job he got, just as long as it included airborne and he got to fight. The recruiter accommodated, but elected not to report Ames's criminal record, opting instead to leave it out altogether. So instead of heading right off to basic training, he was bounced out before his career even started. As 2005 approached, though, waivers became a lot easier to get, so he refiled. By the time he left for Fort Sill in February, he was married and father to a 3-week-old daughter.
Basic was a little funny for us. If you look up my training battery, which was Fox 122, it doesn't exist anymore. It was actually created for only a few cycles, and all my drill sergeants were activated reservists, so they were extra grumpy that they got activated to do this. One of my guys in my squad, his birthday was only like a week from mine. I turned 22 in basic training. I believe he turned 20. I think one of my most memorable things was them finding out that our birthday was that week and making us go through the mud and everything like multiple times. They filmed it and everything to give to our families when our families got there. It wasn't all bad. I think the biggest thing that sticks in my mind is some of those guys that I was there with, including my battle buddy, like the guy that I bunked with. We not only went to basic together, but went straight to airborne school, and then also went to first duty station together. So I actually got to stay with these guys from day one, up until they decided to leave the unit or, God forbid, were killed, in combat, which did happen to one of my really good friends from basic training.
After jump school, he and Danielle started packing up their gear to move to Fort Bragg. Although they had decided that she would go back to live in Fort Wayne with her mother during his first deployment while they both acclimatized to base life, Ames wasn't set to be deployed anytime soon. But the 82nd has a global response duty, and in late August, just as he and Danielle were packing up their home, Hurricane Katrina made landfall and, just like that, his leave was over.
The best way I can describe it is surreal. We actually flew into the Louis Armstrong International Airport because there was no power. You know what I mean? We land at the airport, and it sounds like I'm making it up, but the second we walked into the actual terminal, first thing we see when we walk in is a body in a body bag on a stretcher, like right there in the terminal. Our job as Alpha Battery and Bravo Battery, 1st to 319th, our job was to put them on the aircraft, check them for weapons and contraband, and then get them on these flights. But the thing is, they had no choice of city. It's, you're on this plane, you're going. Be it Missouri, Texas, it didn't matter. People had automatic weapons, drugs, it was insane. But as long as they dropped it, didn't give us any problems, we wouldn't detain anybody or anything like that. Our job was to fly them out. But about a week into it, they moved us to Martin Luther King Elementary School in Algiers, which is more of a project area across the river. Now that was a little intense. We did find a couple of bodies tied and shot. I couldn't tell you who did it. By that time, most of the houses in the area had the spray paint on the front because the infantry had already cleared it. But our job was to go around the area and see if anybody needed any assistance. But we really didn't find anybody that needed help, you know what I mean? It was totally different to see, not even so much the dead people. Dead people we kind of just could push out of our minds because obviously if they're zip tied like that, like somebody had a problem with them. It seemed more personal. The thing that really to this day still hurts me about being down there, like I felt great what we were doing, but a lot of the people that were left behind, and you don't even hear much mention of it, was people that were elderly in retirement homes, assisted living communities. They were left behind. So they're finally getting evacuated. These people have been for days sitting in their own filth. A lot of them have dementia, stuff like that. They don't know what's going on, and they're saying, well, my daughter lives in Missouri. Can this plane take me to Missouri? Well, I know that this plane's going to Oklahoma, but I can't bring it to, I can't tell her that. I just say, yes, ma'am, that's where it's going, because we didn't have a choice. We had to get the people out. And I think that was the most heartbreaking thing, was seeing the people that were just abandoned.
August isn't the nicest time of year to have to patrol in Louisiana, but for better or for worse, Ames was there for just under the 30-day mark that would have qualified him and his team for separation pay. They flew back to Bragg and started training for their deployment. But there wasn't much need for artillery in Iraq, so they were trained as infantrymen. And as the war went on, he and his platoon were attached to different elements. Having to wait your turn to go to war is a particular kind of tension, especially when you see your friends packed off while you're still sitting there waiting.
I know that we were all nervous to go, but everybody was so pumped. A lot of us had not deployed before, and like I said, I was fortunate enough to have several friends, from basic all the way through that got to go with me. My buddy Marshall, he was a 13 Fox, which is the guys that call for artillery strikes. They moved all of them to 573rd and different CAV units. And in April of 2007, there was a large attack in Bakuba, largest mass casualty event for the 82nd since Vietnam. And one of those casualties was Marshall. He didn't have a lot of family that showed up for basic training graduation and stuff. So my mom and stepfather had kind of took him in with us and invited him back to the hotel and took him out to dinner and everything. So there was a little bit more of a special connection than most of the other guys that I went to basic with, because he actually spent time, with my family prior to all this. I can't remember if it was something that we were briefed on. We obviously knew that guys in 573rd were killed, but we didn't have the names. I want to say, honestly, I saw it in the Stars and Stripes, the names, and I saw that Randall Marshall was one of them. Yeah, I think I actually found out from a newspaper.
By the time spring gave way to summer, Ames knew where and when he was going. They'd been attached to the 25th Infantry Division and were bound for Patrol Base Woodcock, not far from the larger Camp Spiker, and they'd be relieving an element of the 101st. They weren't in the patrol base long before they had their first contact. but it wasn't an enemy attack. Instead, it was the second time in 18 months that Ames was nearly killed by friendly fire. The first time had been in Louisiana.
We were patrolling the grounds of the elementary school at night because we would hear gunshots, stuff like that. We had Blackwater drive an APC through the side of the building, through the elementary school, because they claimed that they saw guys with guns. It was us. So they drove right through the side of the gym. We're all sleeping in the gym, and they about ran a couple of our guys over. You know, they jumped out all gung-ho with their weapons and everything, and it's like, you know, we're active duty Army. Like, what the hell are you doing? So that was the first time Blackwater almost killed me.
As Ames and the rest of the 3rd Brigade combat team set up their patrol base, one of their first tasks was to deal with a particular insurgency harassment.
It's somewhere between about 1.5 miles to 2 miles between the main gate of Spiker and MSR Tampa, which is the main highway. Well, they have the big blimp cameras, and we have guards in the towers and stuff, but like I said, that's a 2-mile stretch. Well, what was happening is the enemy was dropping tank mines, or were hastily burying IEDs and mines right at the entrance of the gate in MSR Tampa, and there was something like 5 or 6 people killed in the span of a couple of months right there. So what we did was we set up a small kill team, an SKT, to do overwatch of that entrance, and if we saw anybody stopping a vehicle to drop something or trying to dig, we were going to kill on sight. Right across from Spiker was a thing called ASP, an ammo supply point. That ASP was thousands and thousands of tons of buried munitions, and the only guards that were in that ASP was a Blackwater compound. I want to say they had maybe 15 or 20 guys at most. So we briefed them, hey, we're going to be doing an Overwatch and SKT right here. We went to do our SKT. There was 4 or 5 of us on the ground, and we start taking fire. And, you know, every 4th round's a tracer. We're down in this depression, and these bullets are just going a couple of feet over our heads. Turns out it was Blackwater shooting at us. My lieutenant was with us, one of the best platoon leaders I ever had, Lieutenant Kubaki. He's freaking out on the radio, telling him to cease fire. We did have comms with him, but it took a little while. I want to say they were shooting at us for at least a good minute and a half. Well, turns out those guys were drinking, but we did confront them afterwards, and it resulted in that whole base, their little patrol base area, getting bulldozed down, which was not good, because after that, there's nobody guarding that ASP, and IED incidents increased. Because it's just all there to be dug up now.
That ASP had been a stronghold for Saddam Hussein's forces, so it was more than well stocked. It also was well known. The near firefight with Blackwater was heart-pounding enough without the knowledge that, unguarded, the ASP essentially had become an IED equipment mine. The result was, for the next 15 months of their deployment, day-to-day patrolling of Qadisiyah and parts of Tikrit would become nearly unnavigable for all of the IEDs. A lot of times it can be tough to get grooming products that both are and smell masculine because designers and testers tend to be people in the soap business. Duke Cannon's product design process starts and ends with active duty military members. They come up with the product designs and then they test and review those products. If it doesn't meet their expectations as well as their standards, it just doesn't get sold. It's that simple. That's why a portion of their proceeds goes directly to support veterans' causes. Duke Cannon sells basically everything you need and nothing that you don't. I'm a whiskey fan, and I was really intrigued by the Buffalo Trace bourbon soap. Although it's made with Kentucky bourbon, it doesn't leave you smelling like it. The scent isn't cloying, and it doesn't really stay with you. It's also important to say that this is a massive bar of soap. You know how sometimes the weight of something gives you a sense of the quality? That's exactly the impression I got. But there's way more to Duke Cannon than just soaps. From hair and beard products to cologne and bathroom accessories, there really is just too much cool stuff to talk about. Seriously, check out their website and I'm sure you'll find something that intrigues you as well. Visit dukecannon.com right now and get 15% off your first order with the promo code WAR. Free shipping on orders over $35. That's dukecannon.com and the promo code WAR. The 3rd Brigade landed in September 2006, and things were brisk. But after the fall of the ASP, IED attacks started in earnest. There was a bypass that connected Route Tampa with Camp Stryker, but traffic on it was limited to Iraqi and coalition forces, which meant it was an IED magnet. Ames' platoon avoided it whenever they could, but by 2007, where you drove didn't make a lot of difference. All you could do was keep your eye out and hope for the best.
Our day-to-day for that first deployment was mostly mounted patrols. During that time, they were just starting to put a lot of the extra armor on the Humvees and stuff. Without that, you're done. Because we knew there's a very good chance during any of these patrols we're going to get attacked. Now, is it going to be effective? Is it going to actually, the IED going to hit one of our vehicles? It is pretty rare that it was a really good attack like that. But I would say at least 4 out of every 10 times we left the gate, we got attacked. Well, the one that sticks out in my head the most, that happened to my platoon, I remember the date because it was my birthday. It was March 8th, 2007. It was a 120 millimeter round, but was buried on the side of the road. Majority of my time was spent in a turret. I was the second vehicle in the convoy. I was actually looking probably to about 3 o'clock, and the vehicle was at my 12, and the IED went off. And the best way I can describe it is it's just terrifying. Just hearing that blast and everything, your heart beats so hard that everything in front of me was just flashing white. It was just terrifying. It was massive.
The blast was so significant it took Ames a second to realize that it was the first truck that got hit, and not his.
My buddy Alger, who got to the unit about the same time as me, he was up in the turret. My buddy Weichel, I can't remember if he was the driver or in the back seat, and Staff Sergeant Marshall was TCing. The blast mostly was focused out and not towards the vehicle, which was a blessing, but a chunk of the shrapnel, it had such force that it punched through the windshield. Those windshields are 6 to 8 inches thick. It missed the driver's head by probably 2 inches, missed the guy in the back by about the same, and missed my buddy Alger's leg by, a couple of inches. It went all the way through the windshield and was stuck in the trunk. And I think that's when it got, it hit home really hard, because that damage was catastrophic to that windshield alone. Now, had that hit a person, it's a wrap. You have your standard SOP, but we kind of modified it ourselves to where we would push through the blast zone. I want to say it was like push through 100 meters or whatever, and sweep for secondaries. So we push through, and then once you push through and realize that you're in the clear, that's when you evaluate. Thankfully, in this particular instance, nobody was hurt. Like I said, it was terrifying, but it was also exhilarating, because you're like, this is it.
Often it's impossible to see IEDs, but sometimes it is. We hear stories about guys who were certain something wasn't an IED, who would find out later the hard way that it was. For Ames, the privilege and responsibility of being a gunner on the front truck can't be overemphasized. It wasn't a lack of trust in his buddies so much as a will to exert a modicum of control over his own life. A way of fighting back against an enemy he couldn't see. That meant both keeping an eye out for IEDs, but also keeping potential triggermen as far away from the convoy as possible.
Like the stuff they were killing us with, hitting us with and killing us with, was all things that they just dug up from that ASP or was just laying around. You can strip an old alternator, go find a round that's just buried out there outside Tikrit, and you got a bomb. I can honestly say that my platoon never got hit by an IED while I was in the lead, in the turret. There was one instance where I had the previous first sergeant, the one that I adored, I had First Sergeant Vollmer in the back, and the sun was setting, and it was so low in the horizon, I could see the sun glinting off of the wire. It was stripped red or orange copper wire. When the sun starts to set, if light shines on it, it's going to reflect. You see, this line of light out in the middle of what's essentially dust, rocks, and mud and stuff like that is not supposed to be there. Like it made me feel a very big sense of pride that I could see the light from the sun reflecting on the copper wire of an IED and was able to stop the vehicle before we got up to that point, call out engineers and EOD and get it destroyed while I had my first sergeant in there. And he's just like, holy shit, Ames. He's like, great eyes. To hear that from a first sergeant I really looked up to, like he realized I'm up there paying attention to the point where I just saw a tiny glint of copper, probably a good 70 meters in front of us, and was able to mitigate that before it like I have no idea what it even was. It could have been massive. It could have been catastrophic. But a lot of times you don't even know. You know, EOD will come out and blow it up and they'll be like, oh yeah, it was just a couple of artillery shells. Sometimes they'll tell you, that wasn't the only time that happened. There's 5 or 6 different instances.
There are some leaders that you'll die for, and some leaders that you'll happily forget. Leadership is something of a crapshoot, especially when you're being attached to different units and there are so many moving parts. But just like with any other job, you have good bosses and bad bosses. In the military, though, it's not just life and death, it also can affect a person's career. There are so many stories of guys whose only decision whether to re-up or not had to do with the capricious nature of command. And it's more than just whether or not you can get along. It has to do with betting your life on the competency of a person you don't necessarily trust.
We had lost our battery commander. He got promoted, so they brought in a West Pointer, which I have no problem with West Point, but he wanted to make a name for himself. We had already been there at the time for at least a good 6 months, really familiar with the AO. We had a pretty good understanding of roads that are very high risk, roads that are impassable, historic places where we got attacked. Well, he comes up with this plan. He's like, we need to get more of a foot presence. We need to communicate with the people and ask them about the insurgency in Tikrit. We need to go door to door. My platoon sergeant's like, sir, you don't want to just on foot randomly walk house to house without an objective. It's stupid. Well, he wanted to be able to say that he got some information and that he was being proactive. So we get out there, and we had probably cleared through, at this point, 6 blocks in the heart of Tikrit. And I look in front of me, there's some high-rise apartments right there. Probably about 11 o'clock, there's a whole marketplace full of people. So let's say I get attacked from that area. I can't spray fire over there because it's all civilians. Directly in front of us, a building had been demolished, so it's like an empty lot, and there's this big mound of dirt. That commander is out there with our first sergeant, who also was new to our battery. Well, I go to take a seat real quick in my sling seat. It's probably $1.20. I mean, I'm sweating like crazy. I sat down to wipe my face. I had grabbed my helmet, went to pop my helmet off, and no sooner did I sit down than an RPG got fired right at my truck and zipped right over the top of my head. I don't know how close it would have been. Like, it may have hit me in the face if I was still standing up. Like, that's how close it was. But I just remember the first sergeant climbed under my truck. He climbs under our truck and won't come out. And the battery commander, I don't know where he went. He took off. Like, he's hiding somewhere. After that, battery commander and first sergeant, neither one of them would go out on a patrol anymore. Everybody was kind of laughing about the RPG because it completely missed everything. But we had to pull our BC and first sergeant out from under a vehicle because they're just terrified. They had no clue. They didn't know the area. They had no idea what they were in for. They thought it was all games, and it is not.
Ames was coming up on mid-tour leave, which he thought was just in the nick of time. People end up feeling different ways about mid-tour leave, but a common thread is the sense of urgency while you're home. The inability to completely relax because you feel as if you're ducking out on the people who are counting on you.
I came home for mid-tour leave in February of 2007. I knew we had 15. I still had 9 months to go. Like I said, we had seen so much, so many of platoon getting attacked so many times, stuff like that, that I wasn't resigned to the fact that I was going to get killed, but I thought that it was such a good, there's such a good chance of it that I pretty much just drank heavily when I was on mid-tour leave. It was great seeing my family and everything, but I pretty much figured that there was a good chance I was going to get killed, so I was drinking a lot. The whole time you're at home, all you keep thinking about is, what if something's happening to my guys and I'm not there? Like, everybody wants to go home and see their family, but I didn't want to go home until it was time to go home. My big thing was sending emails out to my buddies, that were still over there, kind of keeping tabs, worrying that I was going to miss something. And I did miss a couple of significant things.
None of his platoon were hurt during his absence, although there was at least one significant firefight. His unit also succeeded in capturing the triggerman for an unexploded IED, which is a rare delight. But it isn't as if all the firefights and IEDs were expended during his absence. There was still plenty of dangerous encounters ahead. The next one for Ames would take place on the military bypass in the middle of the night. With or without night vision, it's unlikely anyone would have seen the IED before it went off.
I just know we were taking that military bypass, and this wasn't a raid or anything like that. This particular night just happened to be a presence patrol. It was two either 110 or 120 millimeter mortars were buried on the shoulder of the road. I was facing the rear, and I had my head up just a little bit above the Pope glass and was leaning over when it went off. Like, it's really weird how artillery shells will explode. Had that thing been more focused at my vehicle, I don't think I'd be here talking to you today. But the concussion, the blast itself actually knocked me down into the vehicle, down by my platoon sergeant's feet in the TC seat. And it took me a good couple of seconds to even realize where I even was. We end up having 1st Platoon come out to help us. They get out there to escort us back. We decide not to take the rest of the military bypass, but to take that main drag. There's just this big open area in the middle of the city. Well, we start taking fire from that direction. So I'm still in the turret and everything. Who else are we going to put in there? You got my platoon sergeant in the TC seat. You got my buddy Sienna is driving, and we got the medic in the back. There was nobody else in the other seat in the back. We're being led by 1st Platoon, and I'm in the very back again. But I just see 1st Platoon open up. Like, they're taking fire. Like I said, I had great night vision and everything. When the IED went off, it turned my night vision off. Like, that's how hard the concussion was. But all I had to do was flip the power button, the toggle, turn them back on. And I see 1st Platoon just lighting this house to shit, because there's a guy on the roof. But the thing is, when it's hot like that in the summer, a lot of times people will, when they're poor, will sleep on their roof. Well, I can see the muzzle flashes of the guy actually shooting at us. Like, I don't know what the hell 1st Platoon was doing, but they were literally killing somebody's house.
It's important to remember that only minutes had passed so far, but the night was fraught and only getting more intense. An MP squad had been to the IED scene before 1st Platoon, but had left without providing escort. For his part, Ames had suffered a significant concussion, but in spite of having his truck blown up and his bell rung, he was still able to think and act clearly enough to make a difference.
And I yelled to the truck in front of us because we stopped. And I yelled up to my buddy Davis. I'm like, Davis, laser. Once again, it's a guy hiding behind like a berm. And there's 2 of them. And I could just see him fucking shooting. And I lit him up with the infrared so they can't see. And me and Davis just ripped these guys up. And 1st Platoon gets on the mic. They're like, what are you guys shooting at? Blah, blah, blah. We're going to go take this house or whatever. And like, I can physically see where my bullets are hitting. These guys were on like a dirt berm, almost in an alleyway between 2 houses. 1st Platoon's like shooting the house on, I'd say, like my 2 o'clock or whatever. Well, this enemy was actually at like 4 o'clock, you know what I mean? I hit the house right there beside him, and I'm walking him down. They have like a bar light, like a fluorescent light on the front of their house. I saw the bullets hit that and shatter that out, and I walked him down, and I could physically see the guy I hit. Like, know for a fact I hit him. 1st Platoon's like, okay, we're going to go and take this house. So we actually have to follow them through this giant open space in the middle of the city. Like, we just got hit, we just got attacked, and now you guys are gonna like try to assault this house. So we pull up to this alley, and I'm like, hey, Smoke, the guys we engaged, they were right here or whatever. And he's like, here, let's go ahead and pull the truck up. And you could see the blood and drag marks going around the corner. So we decide to just go ahead and pull our truck up more. And what it looked like to us is the second guy grabbed his buddy, drug him around the corner into a vehicle. We ended up getting a call later from the Tikrit hospital asking if we had engaged anybody in Adwar that night. And we're like, yeah, we give them the details. And they said the guy had died from a massive trauma to the neck and chest. I ended up having a headache from that lasted for several days. But beyond that, that particular night was wild because it's the only time I know for a fact that I actually shot anyone.
As they began to prepare to close down the deployment, Ames was really happy to be headed home. He was ready for the rest and ready to spend some quality time with his family. But the transition wasn't as easy as he had hoped, and by the time he was truly settled, it would be time to return to Iraq. I've spoken with a lot of people who have benefited from counseling, but many of them put it off because it was either inconvenient or embarrassing. It makes sense. Talking through your difficulties honestly and face-to-face can be intimidating, and even if it isn't, sometimes just the hassle of getting up and going is too much to bear. But whether you have difficulties with depression and anger or trouble setting goals and achieving them, BetterHelp Online Counseling could be just what you were looking for. BetterHelp connects you with a professional counselor in a safe, completely confidential and private online environment. You can schedule secure video or phone sessions as well as get access to chat and text with your therapist. If you ever feel like you need to change counselors, you can do so at any time without any additional charge. Best of all, it's a truly affordable option. This Is War listeners get 10% off your first month with the discount code WAR. So why not get started today? Go to betterhelp.com/war. Simply fill out a questionnaire to help them better assess your needs and then get matched with a counselor you'll love. That's betterhelp.com/war. The anticipation of actually being home must be phenomenal. Once you're off the ground and the Middle East is behind you, there's nothing left to do but wait and think about how nice it will be to finally see your family.
I just remember the worst thing about it was they hold you in a formation out there on the flight line, make everybody all pretty. You got your nice maroon beret, the one that you haven't touched, since you got on the bird to fly to Iraq, and you got to listen to some officer talk and tell you how proud he is. And it's like, I appreciate that, sir, but like I can glance out of the corner of my eye and see my wife holding my daughter, my mother and father, are standing over there, and you're torturing us and torturing them with your words. Just let us go. My parents came down, my stepdad and my mom. I think the biggest trip though was I could see my parents and my wife right there, and a little girl holding a sign that said, welcome home troops on it. And I didn't even realize that that's my daughter, because she's so big. I had saw her in February, but this was, it was probably would have been November or December, by this point. So it's almost another year later. So I see this little girl, and I'm like, wow, that's my daughter. So it's a great experience to finally just be home. I never thought I'd miss North Carolina so much, so.
The toughest thing about that year at home was how long it took the family to reorganize and gel. Danielle was used to running the house, paying the bills, making all the decisions. His daughter, who has Asperger's, also was used to things running a certain way in the Ames home. Ames said it only took a month or so for his family to find its regular groove, which would have been fine if he didn't have another deployment ahead. He was slated to leave in early December 2008. His son was born in November, and Ames left weeks later, knowing that he would miss another set of first steps and first words. If there was any upside at all, it was that Baghdad was not Adwar.
I felt a lot better going into this one than I did about the first one, just because I had that experience. And now I also know that I got guys that are looking up to me, as opposed to me being the one just looking up. The surge happened on my first deployment, and most of the enemies were being pushed out of places like Baghdad, and they would, move north, move south. Well, Tikrit was the next big city, Samarra and then Tikrit. Well, Baghdad and Samarra were both getting heavily patrolled, so a lot of those enemies pushed up to Adwar, Tikrit, Beji, places like that, where we had a lot less presence. The populace was shocked because when you look at Baghdad, especially the Karada neighborhood, I always said it's like Las Vegas. You got the drinking, the strippers, the casinos and all that. Well, alcohol, pornography, all that's illegal in Iraq. But in this part of Baghdad, you would see liquor stores on the street. You'd see women wearing normal skirts and dresses and clothes. You'd see dudes out there going clubbing, stuff like that. So that already was a night and day difference. But the people were shocked that we were doing 3, sometimes 5 foot patrols a day out of our little base, and we'd patrol the peninsula. And these people couldn't believe that we were on foot. They said, well, we haven't had anybody walk our neighborhood the way you guys do in a good 2 or 3 years. I was never in bad shape on either deployment, but I was in damn good shape on this one.
The trade-off for doing all this walking in a mostly pacified Baghdad was that this tour was much less kinetic. Snipers were more of a problem than IEDs, and the soldiers were working a little more closely with the Iraqi police, which could be dicey. Plus, as an NCO, Ames was in a position to help new privates get a feel for what it's like to be on patrol in Iraq.
We had this huge presence. It's almost like we were so aggressive and used to dealing with so much more that whenever any little thing would pop off, we would handle it so aggressive and well that it's almost like the enemy stopped testing us and moved out of our neighborhood. I don't want to sound cocky, but that's literally what was going on. We got this call that an IED detonated on Saint Street, and there was no specific targeting. This random IED in the street. Already this sounds kind of jacked up, like what's going on. So we get there. I got my platoon sergeant. My platoon leader himself, he was gone. We had just gotten this new guy, another, I believe he was a West Point guy, but he had only been in offices. Pretty sweet guy, but very clueless, like had no idea what's going on kind of thing. He'd only been with us like a week. We had a 13 Fox, an FO with us named Dunkelberger. He had only been with us maybe a week or two. We see that an IED had went off. It's like a big giant diesel tank in the middle of the street. And there's this diesel leaking out of it all into the street. There's a puncture in the bottom. We're kind of there doing like a blast analysis, trying to figure it out. And I'm looking and I tell my platoon sergeant, I'm like, Smoke, I'm like, why did somebody make this bomb out of duct tape and homemade explosives? It's not right. And then I found a big hunk of cast iron, like pipe, and it's what they had taped to that bundle and put it under this tank thinking it was going to create an explosion. I'm like, we need to get out of here. I'm like, this isn't right. He's like, there's nothing going on. I said, Smoke, something's not right. I was like, we got to get out of here. I'm like, it feels like they were trying to draw us out here. I'm like, this is obviously a setup to make a big explosion to get first responders. I'm like, we got to go. I'm like, you notice that the Iraqi police that usually are in this area have a very big standoff at this point. Like they're very far away from us. According to our maps, they're supposed to be here about 100 meters closer on both sides. I'm talking to Dunkelberg, asking him, I'm like, hey, you're new. If you were an enemy and you're trying to, attack us right now, like where would you be? Just kind of giving him, telling him to look around. And I tell my platoon sergeant, I'm like, Smoke, I'm like, where are the civilians? I'm like, we got to go. And I'll quote him. He said, these motherfuckers ain't going to do shit. And I go to look over at my platoon sergeant and he's standing there with the platoon leader. And I hear this loud, like a snap. And I just see blood spray out of his face.
The shot was almost like a cue, sending everyone springing into action. Given that they had a relatively green platoon commander and, with Smoke incapacitated, Ames was going to have to step up as things began to deteriorate.
And I instantly know, like, he just got shot. But I in my brain, I'm like, what was that snap sound? Well, me and Dunk are right over here by this, like, abandoned Iraqi police truck. All they had was like a gunner in there that he didn't even have a gun. He was just kind of standing in there. You could tell he was a low level guy. All his guys were gone. He's just like standing in this truck. And I saw that he dropped immediately. I grabbed Dunk by the back of his kit and threw him behind the truck. Our TTP is if our guys are wounded, the truck with the medic is going to pull up and block them from whatever direction the fire's coming from because it's an armored vehicle. I yell for them to come up and I'm yelling sniper. I glance in the back of the truck, like trying to look over and see how my platoon sergeant's doing, seeing if I can crawl over and grab him. The look, I'll never forget the look on this Iraqi policeman's face. Like, they don't like to wear their body armor. He had pulled it over him like a blanket. And his face is like something out of a horror movie. Like, you could tell he he didn't know this was going to happen, but somebody did. You know what I mean? Like, they knew, and they kind of left him there as bait. It was just terrible. So I glance over the truck and I yell, "Smoke!" The truck's pulling up, and he just stands up and runs straight over to the truck. Now, mind you, he just took a bullet to the face. I never saw the platoon leader, so for all I know, he's shot. Truck pulls around, Smoke gets into it and everything, and I run around, open my door. We all get in the truck. They start bandaging up my platoon sergeant's face. You know, he's a couple vehicles in front of me. That Iraqi guy still laying in the bed of the truck, like covered up. And I look up in the TC seat and the PL's not there. Now, I know he didn't get shot. When I had looked over and my platoon sergeant had got up and ran, the PL was not there. So I assumed he had already went back to the vehicle while I was taking cover. No, man, this guy had climbed like under the truck, right? We didn't see him. Nobody knew. And I start hearing this rattling. I'm like, where's the PL? Like mind you, this all happened in less than a minute. And I hear this rattling sound. My PL had low crawled from under that truck all the way over to our truck. And he's on the ground. Now, mind you, he had crawled towards the sniper fire. And that sound is his hand smacking the door handle trying to get in. I literally had to jump over and open his door so he could get in. And they start calling up on the radio for like a sit rep. What happened was the PL locked up and he's got his mic on, like in his hand and everything, and they're calling and he's not answering. We're not moving. We're just sitting there waiting for this dude to give some orders, and he froze.
They got Smoke back to the hospital in plenty of time, and, as far as Ames knows, he's still in the service. Ames isn't, however. There are characteristics beyond dedication and physical prowess that make a person fit for a career in the military. The most critical one is likely the ability to deal with inconsistent leadership. For so many soldiers, that final decision to get out has to do with the realization that they can't spend the next 20 years navigating personality clashes. As it happened, though, Ames didn't have to ETS out. He'd been serving with a bad back since his first tour, and when he got back home from his second, he had it checked out and ended up being med-boarded.
I guess my happy ending in the whole way this all went down is, like I said, majority of my buddies all came home. I don't really dwell on a lot of the negative. You know, some people say that if you deployed, you're a hero, or you're not a hero, or, you know, it's all subjective. I honestly do feel proud about what I did. My big thing is I'm just glad to be able to say, hey, I'm still here. I feel like I actually did my part. I feel my father would be proud. I feel that my family is proud. No matter what anybody says, I'm just glad to have been able to say I did my part. I did it the best I could. I'm still here. I'm still married. You know, that's, to me, you know, that's great. That's fantastic. I'm really glad to be able to say that I'm here right now.
Finding a way to be happy to be here, having a support network and a loving family and a sense that you served with honor can be everything. It's such a small thing, but it's critical and can't be repeated enough. For years, Daniel Ames was defined mostly by his service. But learning to define yourself on your own terms, to understand your part in the world as a collection of attitudes tied to a broad experience, doesn't diminish your service. It only makes it shine all the brighter. Next time on This Is War.
And all I remember is a flash, like a big white light, and then I couldn't breathe and everything was purple. And I popped the door open and I just hear my buddy saying, I'm hit.
Are you a combat veteran, or do you know one with a story to tell? Reach out to us at stories@thisiswar.com with your dates and branch of service and a brief description of the experience that you'd like to share. This Is War was written by me, Anthony Russo, and produced by Incongruity Media. If you like the show, you can help support us by visiting our sponsors or by leaving a 5-star review wherever you're listening right now. You can also follow us on social media at This Is War. You also can find show notes, photos, and more background on each episode at thisiswar.com.